if I could just remind you of it for a moment and then see how we think it could apply here. But let me just share it with him a few paragraphs here. If any parent or teacher is concerned, despite what the science is saying, there are thousands of schools with millions of elementary age kids in person open since September. That's one like post-it that I'd like to put on the wall, that he's saying perhaps we're overreacting about that. And then he goes on to say, I asked public school elementary parents and teachers in New Jersey, a Democratic state, what it was like to be back in school in person since September. And he goes on to say they had the highest disease prevalence in the county since March 2020. If any place in the country should be worried about how to be socially distanced and whether it's safe for kids to be schooled in person, it's New Jersey. And yet they're there. And then he specifically goes on to say, he is on the Board of Education and we are avoiding closing at all costs. Parents have the option for the kids to be taught virtually as we do. So as I because this kept being like a noodle in my head about this, I just couldn't help but think, why are we making this so difficult? It seems like we have examples of how this has worked elsewhere, and we can have our students back in school. We can have teachers given the assurance that they will have vaccines, and I think that's reasonable to think that we can accomplish that. So I feel like I don't want us to make this more difficult and complicated than it is, because I believe that that's what it is, and that we can protect both our teachers who are coming to school and also our students, who we've heard so many things about tonight, and how painful their parents are in watching them go through this anguish. So I'm sharing that with you, and that would be my preference.
Thank you. Mr. Buckman. Mark, you're muted. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. First of all, I want to thank Catherine.
Hey, Mark, you're kind of garbled there.
Got it.
There you go.
Yeah, sorry. First of all, I want to thank Catherine Rogers. I can't believe you have any voice left. That was phenomenal. And I want to just thank everyone for writing and speaking. I was able to read most of the written comments before the meeting, and I found all of them, and the ones that were spoken passionate and thoughtful and informational. I have some details I'm going to try and get this up with from staff.
Mark, you're kind of, I don't know, you're fading in and out, sir.
Come on.
There you go.
All right. So I'm going to just need some help with some details. I have about 5 questions, Chris. I'd like to ask 2 now.
Please. Mark, that would be great if you'd ask your questions, and then the administrators or whoever will respond to them. So please, this is your time. Please feel free to ask your questions.
Okay. So we have about 40% of our students live below the poverty level. And if I can get a little sense of how we're going to get those kids to school, it would help me in making a decision tonight.
Mr. Buckman, I will do the best I can. I met today with Dr. Bornstein at the SLO County Public Health, along with all the county superintendents. We're all wrestling with this very topic of transporting our students. Mr. Pinkerton, who oversees the transportation department, had actually joined me in the meeting and asked the question to Dr. Bornstein about any loosening up of the criteria, the spacing criteria for busing. And as of right now, the answer to that is still no. We still can only put a fraction of kids on our buses, We actually, we're also speaking with county and city transportation hubs, and they're willing to offer us bus passes for students. They also are bound by, I think they can only put 15 or 16 on a bus. So the difficulty there is some kids would be left behind if they maxed out. So just today, Mr. Pinkerton and I are talking about creative ways, working with our BG&T department to get our kids to school, to utilize all the possible resources we have, the buses we have an amazing fleet of bus drivers, amazing department. Creatively speaking, I know where there's a will, there's a way. And if what you're saying to me is what I think it is, my priority would be to make sure we can get our kids to school who desperately need that ride. And otherwise, what's gonna happen is some kids are gonna choose to stay at home because their parents have to work. So we will handle this school by school, case by case. As soon as the board makes a decision, then we'll get busy working on it.
Okay, and as you know, I do work with some rural school districts in Northern California. One of the interesting things that I've learned over the years is they actually pay parents. There's something in code somewhere that allows them to pay parents to deliver kids from way out, so they take their kids and others. So I just throw that out as well. Thank you, Eric. Chris, I'll keep going until you tell me to.
Yes, please. No, Mark, this is your time. Please go ahead.
I just want to be sure I remember this other thing correctly. If I'm not mistaken, the board agreed to have in-person meetings if teachers and students went back into the classrooms. Does anybody have staff remember that?
Yes, I can answer that question, Mr. Buckman. Back in November, when the board adopted the reopening plan resolution, there was also an item, a separate agenda item, where the board agreed to begin having in-person board meetings once we made the decision to reopen our schools. And as you know, we spiked in January, so we were unable to do that. But at this current rate, given what the board already acted upon, we can expect to have in-person board meetings beginning March 2nd, which is our next evening board meeting. And in fact, in cabinet today, we were talking about where we would host that meeting. And because it will involve a whole lot of technology, because we still want to offer the Zoom capability for our community. I mean, look at this. Tonight, nearly 500 people, over 500 participants. It's a powerful learning or powerful mechanism for public engagement. And I think it's a wonderful thing. So in order to offer Zoom and have in-person board meetings, we need to spend some time defining the space and defining the technological components. And that's what we'll get working on. And we should have that that ability by March 2nd.
Thank you. And there's I'm still grappling with the high school and middle school and creating cohorts. I know there's some models out there. Is there something particular in mind that staff can review for me? What we're planning?
Yeah, Mr. Buckman, that's an excellent question. It came up a number of times today. And I happen to believe our secondary hybrid model is a good one. I think it aligns with CDC and CDPH guidance, and it will, at the secondary level, the way we designed it was to have in-person instruction, because approximately 60% of our student body requested to come back in person in November. And the high school and middle school principals spent a great deal of time in December to revamp the schedule in this hybrid model. And what they were able to accomplish was small groups in the morning, Monday through Friday, small groups in the morning. Those small groups allow for social distancing. They allow for all the mask wearing, all the criteria we're talking about. The main difference is CDPH ideally speaks to small cohorts, which means at the elementary school, we've achieved that. At the elementary school, small cohorts speaks to the same group of kids, 16 kids or fewer, that stay together throughout their time in school, in the AM and then in the PM. The secondary level, because students have different classes and courses, we were able to honor kids in their second semester courses. And in the mornings, when they're in person, they would go to periods 1, 2, and 3 on one day, 4, 5, and 6 the next day. And those small groups that come to school in the morning will constitute alignment with CDPH and CDC guidance. Now, it should also be noted that CDC right now is actually discussing the full reopening of schools when we hit a certain threshold, which according to the CDC guidance is not far away from where we're at. And they're talking about full reopening like normal school with particular precautions. So not too soon, not too far from now, we're going to be hearing that type of conversation coming from President Biden's administration, coming from CDC, and coming from Governor Newsom. And I believe this is a baby step towards the full reopening of our school using those mitigation strategies. Now, I'm not playing words here. The hybrid model at the secondary is extremely challenging. It's challenging to create. We were able to do it. The principals at our middle and high schools deserve some kind of award for the work they did to try to get the classes in the way in which allows kids to maintain their electives, maintain their core classes, and remain 6 feet apart. Now, the difference is there will be additional exposure at the secondary level because kids will rotate from period to period. But we will build in, and we have built into that model precautions. So there's fewer kids in the hallways, fewer kids in transition, and the teachers being 6 feet apart, wearing their masks, having the plexiglass divider with the ventilation mitigation we've built in across the district. We really are confident that the secondary model is a strong one and that we can transition our students into that successfully without posing undue risk to our staff. I really believe that. And so I do believe our secondary model, hybrid model, is in alignment with CDPH and CDC guidelines.
Okay. I'm willing to see, Chris, but I just have 2 others. Okay. There a couple of folks have come to me and talked about, I think we're calling them cohorts, the after school the programs that we're doing with small groups. We have some substitute teachers teaching those. And the question is whether those will continue as maybe an after school program or as an off schedule. So if I'm an AM, then at PM, I can do that. They're finding it's been really helpful for learning recovery. So has there been discussion about being able to maintain that program?
Yeah, Mr. Buckman, that's such an excellent point. As you know, we've created Laura Storm through the MTSS process, worked with our district ISLA department to create learning pods. we've hired an additional pretty sizable group of trained part-time help, where they're fingerprinted, they're trained, they're ready to help these small groups of students in learning pods. And the idea is if the board approves this recommendation, then students that really need that help, who have fallen off significantly, we will have identified, we will have aligned to a cohort. So if they're in the elementary school and they're in the AM cohort, they might be assigned to a learning pod in the afternoon.
Okay.
And so that they effectively have a full day of instruction. But we also have to be mindful of the cohorts. We have to be mindful of the movement of kids, but it's still going to allow us, when you incorporate childcare, which Mr. Pinkerton has worked on very well. And if the board approves this, we will have childcare available to our families at all elementary schools. And we will be able to provide our families with that opposite side support, as well as the idea of learning pods. So there are multiple options to support our kids and our families through this process.
Thanks, Dr. Prater. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome. Let's see, who's next? Ellen, Mrs. Sheffer?
Thank you. And a couple of the questions I'm going to ask, I think, have been answered in the past, but because they were raised this evening by some of our various speakers or letter writers, leads me to believe that they may need to be, just need to be refreshed. So I just wrote a few things down that I heard expressed. One, a couple have already been addressed, so I, of course, will skip those. But if I can just go through these and the appropriate person can respond. One has to do with passing periods at our secondary schools. Will they be still just be 5 minutes in length, or will they be a little longer to accommodate for distancing, or is there any change in that?
Ms. McGrath, will you?
Yes, the current schedule they're looking at does have 5 minutes. So we will leave it for sites to have that discussion about flexibility that's needed. There's kind of a balance there, because you don't want too much time, because you're trying to avoid congregating, right? So you need students to perhaps be dismissed staggering times, to keep spacing as they move from class to class. And then, of course, it's that finding a balance in their schedule for the school sites to figure out traffic flow, lack of congregation, and how you create spacing yet have efficient enough movement. And so sites did go back and forth in that discussion, and I know that they'll discuss it further as they get down to the really specific logistics of what needs to happen.
Thank you. Another question I heard had to do with ventilation, and it's my understanding that we've spent a great deal of time and funds in upgrading and addressing various ventilation issues, and in fact have new systems, new ways of doing that at some of our sites. And I think, Mr. Pinkerton, if I can pick on you, I think you addressed some of.
I'll take the bait. Yeah.
Involved in.
Now we did it, as it came on, even in the fall, we started an HVAC audit. So our HVAC people, along with an outside company, have gone through and went through every single HVAC system in our entire district. So ensuring that they all work, from the thermostats to the filters to the units themselves, replaced any and all equipment that needed to be replaced. And then, of course, I believe it was November, December, the board voted for us to also put in the ionizers. And so we, after the first month of having those, we're really seeing a dramatic, amount of particles that are being caught up in the filter. So they're working. So we're going to be replacing those on basically a more frequent cycle throughout the year, to ensure that the ventilation is a key aspect of it's one of the key safety points that we have to consider when bringing people back. So it's definitely something we're focused on and working on. There's still going to be the issue of people leaving windows open, doors open. There's all types of other ways that we can also enhance the HVAC systems that we have that we need to do.
Thank you. And then under the proposed resolution for this evening, is there still parent choice with regard to hybrid or remote learning? I mean, that was just,
Yes.
again, something that we heard.
So at the elementary level in November, I realized the criteria was different. However, we had 80% of our elementary parents. I think we had a 95 or 98% participation rate on the declaration forms. We had over 80% of the parents choosing in person. And I realized the science has changed since then. However, instead of redoing all the schedules that our elementary schools and our HR department and Ms. McGrath and her team have put in place, remember in December, we took the information from that declaration form. So 80% of the elementary parents requested to come back in person. To your point though, Mrs. Sheffer, if parents who previously said they wanted to have their child come back and now they're changing their minds, they don't feel comfortable with this, we'll work with those families on a case-by-case basis. Where it will become very tricky is if parents who chose distance learning for the rest of the year on their declaration forms, if those families change their mind and want to come back in person, that's going to be really tricky because we staffed according to those declaration forms for in person. We built our models around it. For the virtual setting, we have more flexibility. For the in-person setting, we don't, but we will do our best. As I said to my team, let's be slow to say no because we don't know what our families and our students' situations are, and we do our best like we always do. But we have taken great care and have been very methodical in creating the schedules and the teacher assignments to make sure this works smoothly. I know it's a scary time, especially for our teachers. But I've come to the conclusion there's really never a good time to do this. I've looked at this many different ways, and I really believe it will be a successful transition if you approve this. I really believe that most of this is built up in anxiety and fear. And I think our plan is good. Our teachers are absolutely top notch. And our principals are highly effective. We can do this, and we will be there to support the transition. Starting tomorrow morning, we will be visible. We will be there reaching out our hands to our principals and our sites to make sure they have what they need to make this transition successful. We really have to move on it.
Thank you. And that again is something we heard mentioned tonight quite a few times actually, there seemed to be the impression that we were removing choice from families, and I just felt we needed to make that clear that that's not the case. And then I wanted, Ms. Capilano pointed out that she had gathered kind of an analysis from the teachers union, those who chose to participate in the survey. But it's also, which is great, we're always happy to have that information. And I did read it all before coming tonight. But my other question has to do with, we have continued as a district, and administration has, I think, because it's something this district does anyways, but further at the express request of this board to involve the sites and the teachers and all staff in every step of this planning and this process as we've gone through this. And so I'm going to seek that reassurance once again as well, that that has occurred, it continues to occur. We will work to fine tune as we go along, as things come up, that this is kind of how we work here.
Yeah, Ms. McGrath, will you share your experiences working with through this process with Mr. Mayfield, Ms. Newland, and the team that talk about the process you've used every step of the way?
Yes, starting back, wow, it feels like a long time ago that we started working on putting our ideas together for even when we were creating plans A, plans B1, B2, plan C, creating the protocol groups. So as you know, on our website, we have our working guidelines posted. And I don't know if I'll quote the number exactly, but there's probably 25-ish, 30-ish different working groups that have looked at the protocols, the procedures, and people looking at their job specific categories and saying, what do these protocols look like for me, right? Because they change, they're different, they're applied differently per group. There have been people that have really put their heads together, and Dr. Prater's right. We have top-notch people in this school district, and they put their minds together and they can come up with amazing plans. So, the planning all along has input from a wide variety of stakeholders and a wide variety of people. And we created, started those working groups in the spring, in the summer, and then sent them back out because, as things change, we said, okay, keep in mind there's revised protocols. So if you'll look them back over, gather back together and make the revisions needed and let's post them again. So, there's been a wide variety of input with people that are, kind of bringing it down to the floor saying, what does it look like for me?
Thank you. Thank you. And then to everyone we've heard from tonight, I just, for myself, speaking for myself, I'd just like to say, I'm sure everyone realizes that there is no way that the decision we make tonight will make everyone happy, because we've heard stay closed, we've heard open under these circumstances, we've heard, all sorts of opinions, but it's really important that I, as one board member here, let everyone know that I use we because we're a board, we're collaborative, and I don't like using I that much in terms of speaking of our board, but we read everything, we listen to you, we've been attentive this evening, we've taken, I think we can all hold up our pages of notes that we've taken as we've considered the comments and information we've heard here tonight. Not everyone will be happy with whatever decision we land on, but I hope that no one leaves this feeling unheard or unconsidered. So that's just a personal comment at the end. That wraps up my questions at this time, Mr. Unger.
We've heard so far from Dr. Eisendrath Rogers, Mr. Buckman, and Mrs. Sheffer. Who's next? Mrs. Roger?
Thank you. Mr. Buckman took many of my questions. And so we were thinking along the same lines. And so I appreciate, Mr. Buckman, the questions that you asked. I'm wondering about the small groups that have been meeting. I'm concerned about our students who are our secondary students who are on the DNF lists. And I think it's really important that we address their educational needs. And I'm wondering if the small group instruction or the pods that have been going on at the high school level, and I don't know, perhaps the middle school level as well, if that will continue, were we to send students back to school? Whoever wants to grab that one.
Mrs. McGrath, will you please respond?
Yes, that's a great question, Ms. Rogers. So we're currently looking at, we have around 45, 50 pod leaders in addition to the small group learning that has taken place. So we were, started talking about what does it look like to readjust that. Some people, have to go back to other duties. And so we are starting to look at how many people could we utilize for that purpose? And yes, what could we do with students that need additional in-person time? And we will look at how to structure that with the people that we have that are able to do that. Part of what we have to think about too is there will be substitute needs. So some of those people are, usually serve as substitutes, and they were happy to have consistent employment. So there's just a reshuffling that has to take place. And then we will look to see how we could utilize those pod leaders to support kids that need it.
Okay, thank you. Then let's see, I'm also wondering, and this I think would be a question for Mrs. Newland if she's still with us. That I know that an effort was made to accommodate staff that had reasons that they needed to remain virtual, either because they were health impaired, or they had someone in their household that was high risk. And I'm wondering if we were able to make those accommodations for those people, if she's with us.
Kristen, are you with us? Okay. Kristen, you're on mute.
Thanks. Principals have met individually with staff members, and we have been able at this point in time to make accommodations for everybody that has a disability, everybody that has a personal medical issue, and have been working on those people that have other requests as well. But I suspect that after tonight, we may have other requests that come forward to us.
Thank you. So it seems to me, I've read a lot of letters that have come in, and it appears that most letters from parents that I've received have been parents imploring us to bring their children back to in-person instruction. And most, if not all, of the letters that I've received from students have been imploring us to bring students back to in-person instruction. I understand the fear. I really understand the fear that our staff has. I am personally compromised and not vaccinated and don't know when I will be. So I really share the fear of being exposed to other people at this time. I don't take it lightly at all. But when I ask myself, really bottom line, who am I called to serve here? I'm called to serve students. And the message I'm getting loud and clear from students and the preponderance of parents is that they really need to be back in school, that children are suffering and we are seeing huge educational loss. So, when I distill it down to who really is to be my primary consideration, it has to be students. And so I will vote in favor of this resolution.
Thank you. Anyone else? Evelyn, and followed by Evelyn would be Eve. And then Mark after Eve.
Yes, I'd like to thank staff and parents and teachers for this level of advocacy. and commitment and engagement. Couple of things is I would like to strongly reiterate what Mr. Buckman said about having our meetings in person. I think if we are going to ask our staff to be in person, then we have to kind of lead from the front. And so I think that's pretty critical, but also taking into consideration that we're trying to develop a format where we have this engagement at the level that we're currently having. The other thing is, in taking notes in response to, and there was reference to this from some parents and also from teachers about, it almost referencing operate, I can't even say it now, how to operationalize these protocols that we have in place and the time that is needed. And there's been a great deal of effort on the part of our sites and, custodial staff and putting things in place. But, as I was visiting sites who are classrooms that are currently in person and talking with teachers who have operationalized those protocols in person, can you speak a little bit about, the concern that it's, one day for teachers and, they've got this assessment and, and I'm looking at, a calendar. How are we going to address so that teachers, really can have the focus on, making it their classroom safe and they feel safe within those protocols and they're kind of practicing and going over in the mind. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because I think that's a huge concern for, I think, kind of at secondary and for elementary.
Yeah, Ms. Frame, I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And I really need to give a public shout out for the way in which Emily Capilano has worked with us alongside of us in many respects to try to articulate that very thing, which is how do we at the elementary level in particular, our elementary teachers are in the midst of preparing for a parent conference week and putting their report cards together and doing assessments. And for those of you that don't know, and I know all of you do here, but for the audience that doesn't know, it's an extraordinarily heavy lift to do the elementary standards-based report cards and develop the assessments, or at least perform the assessments with their students in a virtual setting and complete the report cards and be ready to then share that feedback with parents through parent conferences. So it's a big lift, and I'm aware of that. So in making this recommendation in the resolution, I was working with our team, and also we included Emily Capilano as the kind of an elementary teacher who's aware of that, as well as how do we bridge this reopening with reconciling the fact that our elementary teachers have this big heavy lift of report cards, assessments, and now reopening. Well, that's just too much to ask anyone. So we decided to move, and this isn't Emily's decision, this was my recommendation, which is in the resolution, that we move the parent conference week, which is scheduled for the week of March 8th, and we move it to the end of March. And the reason for that is then it gives our teachers and our students a chance to be with each other for about 3 weeks, so that during that time, the teachers can perform or can introduce those assessments to their students in person. They can transition from that virtual setting to in person. We agreed that the report card itself is less important right now than getting our kids back in school. So by relieving our teachers of that burden of completing the second trimester report card, and instead focus on doing those assessments between now and the end of March would give the teachers some relief from having to complete those report cards and really focus in on the transition. So I'm getting to your point, your question in just a moment. So the idea then is that without having to complete those report cards at the elementary level for the second trimester, instead insert a focus on the reopening transition and doing the assessments, because the assessments tell the teachers how the kids are doing. So that's very important. And so by the time we hit the last week before spring break, which is the first week of April, we have those parent conferences. And in those conferences, we're having a conversation with our parents who have really co-taught for the last year in many respects, and have a conversation with parents about their child, not having the report card be the central figure, but rather the child and the parent and the teacher. Like, where are we going to go in the third trimester to make sure that we're on the same page and we're really honing in our focus? So with that, to get to your question, Evelyn, the idea is that there are 2 minimum days, March 1st and 2nd, already scheduled at the elementary level already. So in those 2 minimum days, for which the teachers are obligated to do direct and synchronous instruction up until noon, and or somewhere in there, the afternoon becomes theirs. And so the idea is that the 2 days, March 1st and 2nd, the teachers, grade level teams, principals at the sites, we have small elementary schools by and large, would work together on those protocols, on those transition points and agreements. So our principals, we met today, and they're aware of these conversations. They know that these things are coming. So March 1st and 2nd, 2 half days, our principals can work with their site teams on these protocols, on these transitions. And then there's in the contract a full dedicated transition day for the teacher to prepare their classroom and to get everything in order. And boy, wouldn't it be great if we had more time, 5 days, a week, 2 weeks. I could point to reasons why that would be phenomenal, but the luxury of that time is at the expense of our children. And so what I am trying to explain is that at the elementary level, the Monday and Tuesday, March 1st and 2nd, is the equivalent of a full day where the principal and the site team can work together on protocols and transition elements within the hybrid plan. And then the transition day for our K2 staff will be March 3rd, Wednesday, March 3rd, with the start of school March 4th. And then March 5th will be our grades 3rd through 6th transition day. And they'll start on Monday, March 8th. So I think I have those dates right. So, and in the at the secondary level, I do want to say that it's still it's the criteria of case rate is still red tier for our secondary schools. Red tier, 7 or fewer than 7 cases per 100,000, okay, and red tier. But the CDC and CDPH, I should say, CDPH is now saying they went from 14 days to 10 days to 5 days. And there are scientific reasons why that happened. And Penny Bornstein talked about that today in our superintendent meeting, why the red tier plus 5 days should allow you to safely reopen secondary schools under a hybrid model. So I believe in talking with our principals on a regular basis, they're prepared, they're ready to support the teachers and the transition. Our elementary kiddos, will get to come in first if you approve this plan. And I think our staff will have ample time. There's never enough time. There really isn't in the field of education. It's one of those very difficult things to ever get to, because, you know, is half day or a full day enough? And I can make lots of arguments for and against that, but I think this is a compromise where the teachers at the elementary school do not need to burden themselves with doing report cards and assessments right away. Instead, they can get a pass on completing the T2 report cards and instead do the assessments over the next 3 to 4 weeks, which gives them time to be with the kids and really get a sense of how they're doing. So I hope that helped you answer. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, indeed it did, Dr. Prater. The other thing is you know, in listening to my colleagues on the board and listening to parents and teachers, it is clear that our students the majority of our students are really struggling. And it is, despite the heroic efforts of our teachers at secondary sites and certainly elementary sites, that they really need to be back. I would hope that we would continue to look at those models that are successful, that are happening, you know, across the country with metrics that are slightly different than ours, but that ability, I think, at not only elementary school to operationalize is also the same kind of with our secondary sites. And I think some of our Mrs. Sheffer mentioned it. It's the passing periods, those things that our teachers need to see us also leading in front and being out in those hallways, that they're concerned about teaching. They're not also concerned about monitoring student behavior in the hall. So however we can begin to really take care of those little tiny details will, I think, go a long way to make things safer for our staff and clearly for our students. So again, I am in support of this. It's a difficult decision to make, but I think our priority is for a safe reopening, and I think we do have the protocols in place, and we need to have our students back in campus.
Thank you. Eve, followed by Mark.
I mainly have a comment that I just wanted to appreciate the dedication of the teachers, because I myself had a long career in teaching, and I know that how it is to be on the front lines. And I know that sometimes you feel that maybe the board doesn't know because they're not on the front lines, but there are several teachers on this board, past teachers, and we do understand. And it's just that today we have a different kind of challenge than we've ever met before. And the issue of fearfulness about it, I just want to point out that was first started by the ones that were in charge of making the decisions, that they felt fearful. And now if you look at the people who are the scientists and the doctors, now they're not expressing so much fear. So if we follow the science, which we agreed to do since last July, any decision related to reopen will be based on the best available science, then we can also look at our scientists and our medical doctors and perhaps see that their lessened fear, I'm not going to say lack of it, but that there's a lessened fear about this. It's not such an unknown, it's still unknown in many ways, but we're learning to live with it, shall I put it that way? So that's why, my heart goes out to the teachers. And I want to ask if they could have what I had when I was transferring in a district in the middle of a school year, if they could have a substitute work alongside them if they feel overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have to accomplish. Dr. Prater, would you be able to?
Yeah, Ms. Drew, Dobler Drew, I really appreciate your question, and I do think there will be situations among some of our staff that will require some additional support, because it is an uncertain time. There is a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry from really just downright awesome people, and who have committed their lives to kids, and I honor that. And I recognize that I can't fix everybody in this. I can't make everyone feel safe, but I will, and I am committed. I don't think it's a realistic approach to do substitutes across the district, a very expensive proposition. But we did speak to this idea in cabinet the other day about reaching out to our top substitute teachers and getting them on board with us from now until June, so that they are with us and they can support us and support others in times of need and illness or other types of circumstances. So it's a delicate topic, and I'm aware of it, and I will do my best. You could hear from some of the comments tonight that some folks are really, really struggling. And I understand that. And I want you to know I have empathy for that, even though some of them don't think I do. I actually do. And I'm prepared to do what is reasonable and fair to get our schools back up and running.
Right. I thought not everybody would want a substitute, but that there might be some, a parent with 5 children, for example, who's trying to get things organized with the family and might need a little extra help.
Yeah. That very well may be the case.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark,
Yes.
Mr. Buckman.
Chris, I'd like to hear what you have to say, Chris, before I go. I know you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're still a little garbled there, Mark.
I tried to work on it.
It seems like when you get a little closer, it's a little bit better.
Okay. Chris, before I go again, I'd really like to hear what you have to say.
Sure.
Okay. And I'll just wait.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to hold my comments to the end. And I've been really thinking a lot about this as I've listened to everything and really read as much as I possibly can about schools and kids and COVID and everything, and I must say that things have changed. I think the people that talked about the dynamics of the science having changed and us needing to be flexible with it is true. I also agree with my fellow board members that when we really think about the needs and who we're responsible for the children of our school district. I can constantly read about the mental health challenges that our students are facing. I think one of the students tonight, in fact, I know Nick G talked about that himself and talked about self-harm. When Rosalie, our Morro Bay High School representative, knew that we were going to be talking about this, she was ecstatic because she felt the need as a senior to come back to school. I know that there are going to be challenges. I know that everyone is afraid. I'm afraid too. I know that our teachers are afraid, and I think our teachers are afraid. They explained it to us. They're afraid that they're going to get sick, but I think they're also afraid that their kids aren't getting what they need. And I've heard from teachers who say we really need to come back. And I witnessed that with my own eyes at CL Smith when we went there. and observed what they're doing at CL Smith to bring their students back, and successfully, I must say. I think our parents are terrified by what they've seen happening to their children. And I don't use the word terrified lightly, but I think that they're concerned about, I know from what we've heard, that they're concerned about the learning loss that their children have experienced, the loss of socialization that their children have experienced. Nationwide, there's fear that we've lost a generation of students. I am going to support this. I'm going to finish. I really need to talk about something personal and a personal, couple of personal things. One, I wasn't sure I was going to share, but I'm going to share it anyway. I've had conversations with people that are very close to me about this, and we've done the best we can on it. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose friends no matter what I do, but I'm prepared to do that. I'm afraid that my child might not want to speak with me again, but I know what my job is, and I know that we all know what our jobs are and what we have to do. Last week, well, first of all, not only have I paid attention to everything that the parents have said and everything that the teachers have said, but last week, a good friend of mine who was a retired teacher in our district, who has a kindergarten, actually a first grade grandchild who she's been trying to teach, and has talked to me again and again about how unsuccessful this child has been under distance learning. And she came to me in tears, talking about her child, her grandchild, the child that she loves. And she strongly encouraged me to vote to reopen the schools. And I think we can do it. I think that it's going to require a great deal of fidelity. And we're going to have to enforce the rules. Dr. Prater, you know that. Your principals are going to have to know that. We're going to have to make sure that every child wears a mask. We're going to have to make sure that we can do as much separation as possible. Ryan, we're going to have to make sure that ventilation is right. We're going to have to make sure that kids are lining up 6 feet different. We're going to have to use different gates to let kids in. All of those things that we know are going to work, and secondary is going to be more of a challenge. And I expect that this administration will work with the teachers to try to make that happen. And I expect that the students will work together to try to enforce the rules themselves, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a community. So I will support this. And I think we need to move forward. Thank you. Mark?
Yep. So thank you, Chris. That was great. So I'm going to make the motion, and I have a few things I'd like to say. So first of all, I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution 18-20-21. And I just have a thought, and this one's really bugging me. And that's, our teachers have been first responders. All teachers have been first responders every day, all the time. They're the ones that have to identify poverty, hunger, abuse, and mental health issues with kids. And then if there's something else that goes on at the school, we ask them to stay and not get near not be able to go home to their families. They become first responders for fire, earthquakes, and other disasters. And I don't understand why they weren't given vaccinations first. And I don't know if anybody here can answer that, but it really upsets me. I also just want to thank the entire community, because we all decided to wear masks and follow the rules. That's why we're in a position where we can actually even discuss opening the schools. So I really want to thank the community. So I want to make the motion, and thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Do we have a second? Seconded by Mrs. Sheffer. Is there any further discussion from the board? Seeing none, I'm going to go for a roll call vote. Mr. Buckman?
Aye.
Mrs. Sheffer?
Yes.
Mrs. Roger?
Yes.
Mrs. Frame?
Yes.
Dr. Eisendrath Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Dobler-Drew?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. The motion carries 7-0. Thank you all. Let's move on to item number 10.02, Workplace Infection Prevention Coordinator Update. And I believe that's Mrs. McGrath.
Yes, I'd be happy to introduce Holly Warwick this evening. And Ms. Dawson, if you don't mind sharing that. So Holly is one member of Resolute Associates and has done an outstanding job of knowing the broad information as well as the details. And as we all know, it changes constantly. So to have Holly jump in and be willing to do that has been exceptional. She could talk to you some about her role. I really want to thank the board for your just proactive way that you knew that we would have this be a need. And, it was really a handful for a while without her. So and our organization really appreciates it, Holly, and from school sites, administrators to all of us really lean on her expertise, and you're doing an amazing job. So I will hand it over to her to talk about her role as well as steps that have been taken so far, etc. Thanks, Holly.
Thanks, Kim. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. I know you just went through quite a lot, and so I appreciate you hanging in there to hear a little bit more, but it kind of dovetails right into each other. So I was invited here tonight to talk a little bit about the review of our key safety objectives at San Luis Coastal, and then my role as the Workplace Infection Prevention Coordinator, as well as what risk mitigation will look like in the workplace. So our key safety objectives, what's the beautiful thing about San Luis Coastal is you adopted key safety objectives early on, and it's the structure that you've put in place for success for bringing these children back and keeping your employees safe. It's founded on 5 key principles, which is kind of ironic because that's exactly what the CDC put out just recently. They've remained the same. These are the same objectives that you've had from the beginning. And it's simple. It's keeping people home who are ill and those who have been exposed to someone who has COVID-19. The second is to utilize those hygiene methods that we hear so much about, the importance of washing hands or using hand sanitizer if hand washing is not practicable, as well as the respiratory hygiene. That's the covering your nose, preventing the illness from spreading when you sneeze, your germs or your spit molecules. To use physical distancing, wear face coverings, in particular masks, and ensure that student and staff groupings are as static as possible. And when we look at that, we're looking at the community. I think, Mr. Unger, you spoke about it quite well, and it really does connect, because so what San Luis Coastal's done is they've really looked at all aspects of a child's school day, and as staff members, we're looking at coming from home to school, we're looking at what happens during the school day, and then we're also looking about when students leave school. So what I do for you is I provide the coordination of the COVID safety program. So what that looks like is me being available for principals and site administrators with the plan implementation. What I do is when new guidelines come out, I'll read through them, I'll communicate with the district office and site administrators. I go in and I update your plans. I also go and I update your website when new information comes out in coordination with the district. I'm also available to site administrators on an ongoing training basis. They can call me at any time, and I'm always available to them to help them with whatever might be in the moment. Oftentimes they might not be able to go through and flip through the guidelines to find the specific answer because they need it in the moment. I also maintain the district data and the reporting of the data. And so one of the things I do is when the CDPH puts out their report of the data metric that they release on Tuesdays, I go and I read through that, and then I'll summarize it, and I summarize the district data for that same time period. So when we update the dashboard, I'll go and I update your dashboard as well as your school's data. And we always do it for the same time period that the CDPH releases information. So when you're looking at San Luis Coastal's data, you're looking at the exact same data set that the CDPH released on the exact same day. The other thing we're doing right now is your COVID prevention program, the CPP. Part of that involves the school site inspections. Resolute developed an app that we use that generates reports. And so that's a customized walkthrough of sites where we talk about risk mitigation, identify any areas that could be potentially at increased risk at a site. We troubleshoot with the administrator, we write recommendations, but then we also answer questions. And we tend to follow the flow of a student would follow throughout the school day, starting with the entrance to school, walking all the way through, as well as looking at specific locations that we know tend to be areas that there might be congregation or crowding. And the administrators are great for that because they already know that, they already have that site knowledge. The other thing we do is the positive case exposure reporting and response. So whether that's on-site or off-site, if a student's working remotely, that information comes to me from public health. I identify who that person is through the district office, and then we confidentially notify the site so that they're aware as well. And that way, if there's a student who is working remotely but maybe comes on for athletics, we can identify that and act accordingly as well. I also develop procedures and documents and training material in collaboration with the district, and we help with that. In particular, we are training our site admin with site-specific consultation that they then deliver out to their sites and their staff. And as we see that we're getting closer to reopening, you're going to see that rolling out more and more and more, because we're going to need teachers on site for that training because it will be site-specific. And then of course we deliver that training as well. So I can do that as well. But I also provide editable resources to help move things along. So when we talk about risk mitigation, we use what's called a Swiss cheese method. And we talk about shared responsibilities. You have personal responsibilities, and then you have shared responsibilities that the whole community, in this case, the school, takes on. When we layer those mitigation strategies, we create a barrier and we lower the risk of transmission. And it's a collaborative effort. Obviously, when the community spread is low, there's less likelihood of catching COVID in a community setting, such as a school. But when we layer that with distancing of sick and hygiene and limiting crowds and increased ventilation and then quarantine and isolation, we start shifting the holes that could possibly align, and we create a stronger package to build a buffer between the risk of transmission for individuals. So when we talk about shared responsibilities, and Mr. Unger, I was thinking as you were talking, this is very similar to what you were talking about. Our families have responsibilities. One of the areas of responsibility that they took on was the selection of in-person learning or staying in the virtual learning program, but also the choice to follow the daily screening. And then for the school staff responsibilities, we influence the student responsibilities. So we take a lot of efforts there. We give our information to families. We provide daily health screening, response to illness, ventilation, physical layout, routines, routes, signage, teaching and practicing safety for students, supplying the right equipment and supplies. And then of course, the response to actual positive cases. But we also facilitate the students having their own responsibilities, which we take on as well, which is that hand washing, the distancing, and the use of face coverings. You'll hear me talk about it in a second, but we keep referring to it as the big three. So as Ms. McGrath mentioned a few hours ago now, we have a daily health screening that will be starting on Parent Square on February 22nd. And we are excited for this because what it will do is it will provide daily information and decision-making support to every single student and staff member for San Luis Coastal. We know that there'll be less staff interaction if we have this happening ahead of time. So when parents are, or students themselves are validating their own wellness, they're actually notifies you that you should stay home. So it's also, in some ways, it's a virtual training that we innately take on. By having this happen ahead of time, we are minimizing our gatherings and lines, because what we don't want is we don't want stagnant waiting as much as possible. It also kind of aligns with other systems such as attendance tracking for when it's validated on site. We know that we can do it with longevity and we can do it with our current staffing, and it also aligns with CDPH and CDC recommendations. So what does that look like? Well, parent screening the parent square screening will get sent out at 7 a.m. in the morning. Then at that point, when a student is coming to school, they have either participated in it before arrival or they didn't. But we have a response to both of those. If the students participated, the teacher or the staff member has access to see who in that class has already participated in as well. For those that aren't, they can step to a side and follow the second column on the right. I have a partition, and I think my dog's leaning against it, so sorry about that. So if a student doesn't participate in this screening prior to arrival, the staff member would take them to the side. They could hand them a hard copy of the form for the student to fill out, and then they could submit it, or they could verbally ask them subtle health screening questions, probably starting with something more general. Are you feeling sick today, or do you feel like you have a cold? If the answer to that is no, then you know that they're doing fine. If they say, oh, I don't know, or yes, that's where you'd go a little more deep and say, okay, well, let's talk about that, of course, from a distance away. So now when you have a positive case, there's a different response. And so what happens in that situation is that the site administrator finds out about it, or the absence coordinator notifies the site administrator. They contact me, we talk through the details, and then we act accordingly, including pushing out notifications, the possibility of a cohort closure. I notify public health, we document it, and we also monitor the thresholds to make sure we don't have like an outbreak on site, or something else, like a threshold amount that we might need to consider. Another mitigation strategy is stable grouping and the effort to minimize congregation. We do that right away. If we think about how we're going to break apart the amount of students on campus, we do that through our scheduling. So one is with the enrollment in the virtual learning program. Right there, you've thinned out part of the traffic that would be on site. Then you go to an AM PM schedule that you're thinning out again, or staggered start times, thinning out again. A hybrid model is thinning out again. And staff helps direct student traffic. So we're keeping a flow of traffic. Parents and guardians would stay in their vehicles at drop off unless it's designated on site by like a lower grade level or some other need that would necessitate parent assistance on site, but otherwise it would be just students. We would assign gates for grade levels, mark waiting areas for distancing in elementary school, and in secondary, really focus on a flow of student traffic with adult monitoring in particular for areas where we know that there's congregation. So what ends up happening is we go from what used to happen, which is kind of that top square of a crowd of people all mixed together, to a more formalized linear movement through, and then even further would be identified groupings. So what do classrooms look like? Well, it's following the same idea, and there's a couple different examples. So when we look at preparation, we're thinking through in that you can have different configurations, but we want common things. We know that if students are facing forward, there's less risk of transmission. We know that if they're 6 feet apart, there's less risk of transmission. There needs to be 6 feet from the instructional area from the teacher. We can use distancing markers on the floor for alternative seating or spacing. We want to eliminate extra items to increase more room and make cleaning more easier and functional and efficient. And we want to open those doors and windows and get that high ventilation. So either one of these options could work more for a secondary classroom, maybe in upper grades, or even a lower, but there's also, this is a classroom at Sinsheimer Elementary, and the smiley faces I've put masks over as well. You know, we're really hitting it hard. But once again, it's the same concepts, but it looks different. In this classroom, there's not desks, but there are markers, and you can see the students are spread out. So in our mitigation, we look at, well, okay, what could be an area of concern? And one of it is small group instruction. Well, you can do it. We recommend using plexiglass. And this would be these are diagrams of table types. But even better is you could do it outside. There's more ventilation. You can think about beach towels being rolled out. It spreads kids out. You could see more people. So cleaning. Custodial is going to provide soap, buckets, microfiber cloths. Admin will arrange with a custodial schedule for cloth replacement. The only products that should be used are the cleaning products provided by the district and the hand sanitizer from the hand sanitizer dispensers that were installed by the district and are maintained. And then if there's disinfectant, it should not be used at all when students are present. And of course, that's the EPA Endless product. And any staff using it must have training to do so. And that would be when students are not present or in an area that had been infected. And also when students are not present. So protection from illness on site, this is more of a response. So all sites have a designated isolation room for students and staff who might exhibit COVID symptoms. There's specific staff trained in the use of this isolation room and it can be easily disinfected. Most isolation rooms on the sites, they have access through an exterior door and they have high ventilation, which is a great design. Parents and guardians would pick their child up from this location, but they also might pick their child up in front of this location because if the child's doing well, it's even better to stay outside and we can wait outside. We can facilitate that with an adult monitor that's keeping distance as well. Personal protective equipment would be in the room, but also we're having it to transferable bags with should you to someone on. Recommend a couple different locations for that PPE in a grabbing who might be ill to not be with a group. So information will be provided to parent and guardian at pickup that includes care, absence, and monitoring of symptoms. So signage, we talk about the big three, and that's that hand washing or the use of sanitizer if it's not available, staying 6 feet apart and wearing a mask or a covering. And we say everyone can do this. It's the district's expertise, it's in everybody's power, and the sites are designed to facilitate this. So we're encouraging sites to come up with their own age-appropriate visuals and terms, or the use of the school mascot, or in staff collaboration for common language. And this would be posted prominently in every classroom in common areas. Obviously, this adorable bunny washing, I think it's a bunny, washing hands with a mask, that might work really well for an elementary or a kindergarten site, but it probably isn't going to get the right kind of buzz at a high school. So we would say, know your clientele, right? And then signage in general, what you can expect to see is information, because even if somebody is spacing a little bit or not really like fully reading through a whole sign, they can at least look at the graphics, and these graphics are pretty bold, and it's great reminders with information. So you'd see in classrooms, restrooms, above sinks, common bulletin boards, and in newsletters. So that's a very brief overview, I hope, for you. So thank you, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Okay. You know what, I think I'll go to before we do, before I go to the public and then to the board, I know this is not an action item, this is an informational item. I would point out that our board bylaw, I believe it's 9332, sets a time limit of 5 hours for our board meetings. So far, we've gone 5 hours and 20 minutes, and that's not counting closed session, which I didn't count. We have several other pieces of business that we probably need to attend to. I think most important is the Measure D things that we'll be following after Holly's presentation. So I want to poll the board to see whether we want to, as soon as this presentation is over, whether we want to end the board meeting, whether we'd like to continue, complete the business that we have. Perhaps we could do the Measure D things first and then do the board policy and the consent agenda. So does anybody have any preferences on that? Marilyn?
Well, I think it would be great if we took action on the action items tonight. We can, in my opinion, we can roll the board policies unless
Okay.
there's some reason that they need to be enacted. I mean, they all come back. They're as first readings, I believe. And then it would, I think consent's pretty easy if we make board reports. Perhaps we could eliminate board reports unless anybody's got something really pressing that they need to tell us about. We can just do the Measure Ds and the consent.
Okay. Mark?
How do other people feel?
Yeah.
Mark, you had your hand up?
I think I've got it. So let me repeat back what I heard. We'll do all the action items, do consent, and then kind of call it quits. And I agree. And I would check with Ryan. I think some of those consent items
Yes.
we need to do because of warrants and payrolls. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I believe the Measure D items, we need to complete those as well.
There's timeline things for the Measure D project. So yeah, if we can, I would like the board to.
I have to say, Chris, I've had so much coffee. It doesn't matter how long we go.
Well, there's only one reason it might. That said, so is there a consensus from the board that we will do the action items, delay we're spending a lot of time on this, delay the board policy items until next time? Are we good with that? Show me thumbs up, please. Everybody good? Okay. I'm sorry, Holly. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the board on this item? Hold on. We have 2 people. Okay. Hold on. Let me get my 3-minute timer. Okay.
1 second.
Hold on, please. Okay, first person is Mila Voyevich-Labar.
Good
you have
evening.
3 minutes?
Yes, I do. Good evening. I won't take all the 3 minutes. Thank you very much. I wish this presentation had been given when the general public was there. And I would just like to revisit a couple of issues. One, the safety issue on as far as checking public health and student health. A majority of my students who have not been fully participating have been Spanish speaking or have been low income students with limited access. And so I would like Holly to address that as far as how that's going to be addressed. A lot of the students I'm very concerned about that are in that F range do not have access. And so how are those students going to be responding to the public? The other issue that I saw in your slideshow was that teachers are going to be taking care of traffic. And so I'm a little bit concerned about that. And I would like you to elaborate on that a little bit more. In addition to that, I'd like to fully address what PPE is going to be provided. I have been working diligently in my classroom when I have been teaching remotely to go ahead and make sure everything's fine. And I'd like to be assured that all of the PPE is going to be addressed on a daily basis, as well as gender neutral bathrooms. We have a 5-minute passing period. We have about 15 women in my G wing and 2 men and 2 bathrooms. And so I've been asking for gender neutral bathrooms for over 10 months now, and I've yet to see the change. The other thing is that as a couple of board members have already responded to me, I would hope that you would respond to the student Nick G, who spoke up about self-harm in our previous talk. I know this has been a stressful time for students as well as teachers. So Holly, I look forward to meeting you as somebody who has been diagnosed with COVID. I've had a couple of sleepless nights with my family members, as well as worried about my students. So stay well, everybody. And I'm looking forward to seeing my students, but safely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mila, I don't think we're going to be able to answer all your questions this evening. However, I see Dr. Prater is writing them down. So perhaps those are some things that we can address later. Next is Sarah Flickinger.
Hi, thank you. My question has to do specifically with the PPE being provided to teachers. I am part of the up to 6% of the population in the US per the CDC that has a diagnosed latex allergy. And so I'm wondering if that PPE and any of the rooms where a student might be kept, if those are going to be latex-free spaces or latex-safe spaces, both for the safety of an individual who may have an allergy and also to reduce occupational exposure. For the teachers and staff, occupational exposure is a risk factor for developing latex allergy. It's caused by recurrent exposure to latex in the workplace. It progresses with each additional exposure, and there's no treatment other than avoidance. So I'm hoping you can elaborate as to whether those materials will be latex safe or not.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm going to let the staff respond to you, I think individually, as a former special education teacher who worked a lot with gloves. I understand what you're talking about. Last, we have Mindy Esau.
Hi,
Mindy?
thanks you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. First and foremost, I have just got to commend all of you, and 5.5 hours later after your closed session, thank you tremendously for all of your efforts. Clearly, you guys have put so much of your own, not just professional time and commitment into this, but you're all clearly personally. So put your hearts into it. So thank you. I am wondering, I work at Club Pilates actually in San Luis Obispo, and they just had a treatment put on all of their equipment called monofoil. And it's used in hospitals. It's used, I forget, she listed all kinds of high touch businesses, hospitals being one of the primary places that it's implemented, but it's called monofoil, and it's a spray on treatment that actually contact virus, bacteria, COVID. Apparently, if it's someone with COVID positive touches it, or like sprays spittle or something, it dies within 3 minutes of contacting the surface. So I mean, that's probably a wildly industrious, expensive thing to implement in this school system abroad, but it's just something I wanted to throw out there and see if there were any of those kinds of things that maybe could be also implemented that might also help teachers to feel like that's another safety measure that could be possibly added.
Great. Well, thank you, Mindy. And again, I saw people taking notes on that, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you guys.
I'm not seeing anyone else. So let's bring it back to the board for questions for Holly. And Holly, thank you very much for the really informative presentation. Is there anyone who has questions for Ms. Warwick? Ms. Dobler-Drew?
Actually, it's Dobler-Drew.
Dobler, I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, you're not. Everybody else does it too. That's okay. Anyway, so Holly, can we assume that there is a greater, efficiency or in the cleaning, but that the teachers will not have to do as much of it? Per the CDC guidelines, that disinfection is not as much needed as they had once thought?
Well, the disinfection's not as much needed, but they still recommend frequent cleaning, especially between items. But soap and water.
That's good. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Any other questions from board members? Okay. Well, thank you, Holly, very, very much. Sounds like Dr. Prater. Oh, you're waving goodbye. I'm sorry. Did you have a question, Dr.
No,
Prater?
I was waving to Holly.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, Holly. And we really appreciate the work you do and the work that Resolute has done for us.
Thank you for having me tonight. Good job, everyone.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 10.03, Measure D, San Luis Obispo High School new pool and fields leaseback termination of leases with Acme Construction. That would be Mr. Pinkerton.
So yeah, as we talked earlier today, the board passed a resolution. This was our last leaseback project that has been completed at San Luis Obispo High School. If you have an opportunity, please stop by, check out the pool, the beautiful new field that's been put in. But we need the board tonight to go ahead and approve the termination of the lease and quit claim deed.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the board on this item? This is an action item. Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to the board for discussion or a motion Would someone like to make a motion? Mrs. Sheffer? Mrs. Sheffer, I can't hear you.
I would like to make a motion to approve the termination of the lease with Acme Construction Company for the San Luis Obispo High School new wonderful pool and fields project.
Would someone like to second that? Catherine, I'm sorry, Dr. Eisendrath Rogers is the second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Sheffer?
Yes.
Dr. Eisendrath Rogers?
Yes.
Mrs. Dobler-Drew?
Yes.
Mr. Buckman?
Yes.
Mrs. Frame?
Yes.
Mrs. Roger?
Yes.
And I am a yes. Thank you. Let's move on to item 10.04, Measure D, Design Build Modification number 7, setting the GMP for Morro Bay High School Building A demolition and abatement. Again, back to you, Mr. Pinkerton.
So yeah, I want the public to know that we did review both of these projects at our study session last Thursday. As we went through all the project lists. So though it may seem kind of quick as we go through these, the board was updated on these two projects moving forward. So the first one is the abatement and demolition contract for the Building A, which is the theater, food service, former library, which will become the new theater, drama room, choir room, and multi-purpose and kitchen. So this GMP was just to do the demolition and abatement of asbestos in the building. And so they'll be beginning that. And then kind of what we've done with Building B and some of the other buildings, we'll go through after the demo's done, ensure that everything is proper in the plans and proceed. So we were very happy with the fact that we got multiple bids. We had bids all the way from Irvine through to the Valley. So we feel really good about the overall price that came through for this GMP and are ready for the work to begin on Building A at Morro Bay High School.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the board on this item? I'm not seeing anyone. I'll bring it back to the board. Mr. Buckman.
Yeah, just real quickly, Ryan, were there any local bids or any subs going to be used by the folks from outside the community?
It's almost all local construction companies.
Okay, thanks.
Both projects.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Motion by Mr. Buckman. Hold on here. Who would like to second that?
Second.
Dr. Eisendrath Rogers, you're second again. Any further discussion? Okay, Mark, Mr. Buckman, sorry.
Yes.
Dr. Eisendrath Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. Dobler-Drew,
Yes.
Ms. Frame,
Yes.
Ms. Roger,
Yes.
Ms. Sheffer,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. Motion carries 7-0. Item 10.05, Measure D, Design Build Modification number 8, setting the GMP for Morro Bay High School quad modernization.
So this is one that I think everyone on the board can be happy to vote for, right? One of the probably biggest eyesores at the Morro Bay High School campus has been that quad. And so the demo is currently underway, completely, done. It's going to be a beautiful place for kids, right? For staff in the future, but we are ready to get going. So with the demo almost complete, we can begin the actual construction. So this GMP, like the last one, actually came in under bid from what we had expected in the budget. And so we'll be using those dollars that we had set aside for the Morro Bay infrastructure to complete other Measure D projects at the site. And basically are really excited to bring forward this GMP to redo the quad at Morro Bay High School. The goal will, like Rosalie said earlier, that campus is pretty torn up right now, but we're gonna make it work. And Holly walked the site with the administration the other day to make sure that kids can be back in session when we can. But the hope will be that this work will be completed by the fall. So when kids come back, both building B and this quad will be completed.
Well, I know that's going to make a lot of people at Morro Bay happy. It's certainly going to make me happy. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the board on this item? Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to the board. Would someone like to make a motion? This is Roger.
I'll second.
And who was the second? I'm
Well,
sorry.
before I make the motion.
Yes, please.
I'd like to note that Mr. Holcomb, the board's Measure D consultant, has hung with us for quite a long time this evening. So I just wonder if he has anything he would like to add so that his time has not been in vain.
You have a very, very long address. The bid environment has moved in our favor. We're getting multiple bids, wider and more diverse geographical area. So good news on the financial front.
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. So am I making a motion or seconding a motion?
You have made the motion now.
Okay.
And Ms. Dobler-Drew has seconded the motion.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. Ms. Roger?
Yes.
Ms. Dobler-Drew?
Yes.
Mr. Buckman?
Yes.
Dr. Eisendrath-Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. Frame?
Yes.
Ms. Sheffer?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Motion carries 7-0. Let's move down to the action consent agenda. Please let me know if you'd like to pull any item. 11.01 acceptance of donations. And you're going to have to speak up because I got to read this. I can't pay attention to the screen. 11.02 disposal of surplus. 11.03 approval of furniture and equipment requests. 11.04 approval of foreign exchange organizations. 11.05 approval of certificated and classified personnel items. 11.06 Measure D approval notice of completions. 11.07 proposed revisions to board policy 0420.4 charter schools, second reading. 11.08 proposed revisions to board policy 4033 lactation accommodation, second reading. 11.09 proposed new board policy 5131.8 mobile communication devices, second reading. 11.10 proposed revisions to board policy 5132 dress and grooming, second reading. 11.11 proposed revisions to board policy 6174 education for English learners, second reading. I see nobody has pulled that. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address the board on any consent agenda item? Not seeing anyone, I'll bring it back to the board for a motion. Mr. Buckman, thank you.
Yep, I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
Okay, is there, who would like to second that? Mrs. Sheffer?
Okay.
Got Mrs. Sheffer as the second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Buckman?
Aye.
Mrs. Sheffer?
Yes.
Mrs. Roger?
Yes.
Mrs. Frame?
Yes.
Dr. Eisendrath-Rogers?
Yes.
Mrs. Dobler-Drew?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, the motion carries 7-0. I think, did we agree is that there was no one that had anything to say on advanced agenda at this point? Okay, and do we have any brief, important reports by board members? Okay, thank you. Just want to thank everyone for hanging in there. This was a very important meeting, a very heartfelt, emotional meeting. And I think we're going to need to go forward. We've given the administration their marching orders, and they will carry on. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
This
Chris.
meeting is adjourned.
Night.